Well, let's hope the judge is not just a gas bag and actually does something about what he said. Let's drag us all back, if we will, for a few minutes to the Constitution, okay? Because that's the bottom line, and this is where it's going to wind up. And the Attorney General and the Deputy Attorney General really have to answer some fundamental questions about this investigation. Mr. Mueller wants to interview the president, and he wants to interview him under the most onerous circumstances. What is the purpose of an interview like that based on those 49 general areas? His purpose is to indict the president. Now, what's the purpose of indicting the president? To try the president and to find him guilty. What's the purpose of a conviction? It's to remove the president of the United States from office. That's the bottom line. No president has ever been indicted while in office. Not one. No president has ever been forced before a federal grand jury. Not one. No president has ever been removed from office by the United States Senate and 2/3 vote of the Senate. Not one. Mueller's purpose, his purpose, is to remove the president. That means one man, got it, that means one man, one jury would usurp the power, the entire constitutional power of Congress, the power to remove a president. You can indict every other public official, a judge, for instance, while they're in office, and go through the impeachment process. You cannot do it with a president. And I'm going to tell you, I've been studying this for decades. I'm studying it now. Here's the authoritative book. So what's going on now? It takes 2/3 of the Senate to remove a president. Not one prosecutor, not one jury. So my question is, from a constitutional perspective, to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, it's time to step up. To the Deputy Attorney General, it's time to pay attention. To the entire country, to all the lawyers you bring on here, this that is going on here now, these fights over whether he's going to be subpoenaed, the president, whether he's going to answer questions, whether he can be indicted in office, I want people to understand that the framers never even contemplated what's going on today. They never contemplated that one prosecutor, a civil servant, a bureaucrat appointed by somebody else, would have the power to effectively remove the president of the United States. The reason why the Democrats are hanging their hat on Mueller, the reason why the media are hanging their hat on Mueller, they'll never get 2/3 in the Senate to remove this president. I don't care if they impeach him. They'll never get 2/3. It's never happened before. So what they're hoping to do is trap him in this notion of a subpoena and questioning, indict him, try and humiliate him, try and force him in front of a court, hope that they get the Supreme Court on their side, which I doubt they will, but you never know with these courts, and then get him to resign. That's their game plan. You heard it here first. This is very, very important. From a constitutional perspective, as I speak, Mr. Mueller is undermining the Constitution. He's not upholding the rule of law, whether he's consulting with Comey or consulting with Nostradamus. My point is this. What's going on right now is anti-constitutional and is undermining our system. The framers wanted the body politic to decide on whether or not to remove one branch of government, just as the body politic put that person there in the first place. The media are too ignorant, they're too liberal, they're too obsessed to understand this, but I'm hoping tonight, with a few minutes here, the American people will.
All right, now I'm back live. And I'm told today that at least 2 hosts repeated that almost word for word. 2 hosts in my business. This is a very bizarre business I'm in. 2 hosts. Well, shame on them. Now, let's walk through this a little bit. Why I think you listen to this program, why I think we have a special relationship. All you Levinites out there. You know, 6 p.m. on the East Coast, 5 p.m. in other parts of the country, 3 p.m. on the West Coast. You can be doing a whole lot of other things, particularly on a Friday. But you listen to my show. The downloads of this show, for people who don't even listen on terrestrial radio, is in the 5, 6, 7 million category every month. You must listen to the show not because I'm Henny Youngman and can crack 50 jokes at a time. Not because I do a lounge act. Because I am convinced that you really want to know what's going on. I don't mean from TV and everything. You really want to know the substance. I come to this job with a mission. It's not just work for me. It's a passion. And so before I get to this microphone, I've already put in 7-8 hours trying to approach something in a certain way. That's why I'm on at 6 p.m. I'm not on at 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. or noon. Although I have to be honest with you, I've been thinking lately, maybe I ought to move up. Maybe I should move up to noon or 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. or whatever it is. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Now let's walk through this, because many of you are with me on a fairly regular basis, or as much as you can be, as I do this program. On March 2nd, on a Thursday, 2017, I spent several hours before coming on the air because something struck me about what I'd been reading. There were leaks that were going to the New York Times, the McClatchy Press, the Washington Post, other outlets. And I noticed a pattern. Were they trying to brutalize the president? Yes, of course. And then I went back. I went back to 2016, that summer, during the course of the campaign. And then I went forward through the fall. I said, holy mackerel. Ask Mr. Producer. Holy mackerel. They've been spying on the Trump team. Remember that, Rich? They've been spying on the Trump team. I don't really have my hands completely around it, but something is wrong here. Now, look, that's because of my experience as a former chief of staff to an attorney general, familiar with FISA, familiar with the intelligence side of the House and things of that sort. If I had a different kind of background, it wouldn't click in, but it clicked in. And so I spoke to you on March 2nd, 2017. You can pull it up. I'm not going to play clips from it. And I put together what were the parameters of much of what we know today. When I was done with the radio program, I said, this isn't enough. I got to dig some more. As a result of that radio program, Breitbart took off with it. The president took off with it. I said, I got to dig some more. I was invited on Fox and Friends, I think it was Sunday or Saturday, and Pete Hegseth, who's a terrific guy, interviewed me. And they had me on for 2 full segments. It was supposed to be 1 segment. They asked me to stay over. And I took the essential evidence that was in the public record. I don't have subpoena powers. And I organized it into 8 exhibits. And I went through it on national TV. I said, look at this. And I talked about FISA and all the rest of it, as best as I could glean from the public record. Then I was invited on Sean Hannity's show on March 6th. I did the same thing. Then I came under a withering attack. Withering attack. CNN and Jake Tapper and Brian Stelter, ABC News, Brian Ross, who apparently doesn't exist anymore, MSNBC, the Associated Press, on and on and on. Right-wing conspiracy theorist. Kook. Somebody with my credentials, both professional credentials, my educational credentials. I was now a right-wing conspiracy theorist kook. And I said to my wife, I'm on to something. I'm on to something big. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's big. And I fought back for 2 weeks. And I can count on one hand the number of people in this business, in the conservative talk radio business, who backed me up. And even some of my friends sat silently. They were so scared and nervous about what was taking place. Not me. Not me. I continue to dig throughout the year. That's what I do. That's how I'm trained. June 10th, 2017. I dug up the old Department of Justice memoranda, 2 memorandum, collectively memoranda. The one from the Nixon administration and the one at 1973 and the one from the Clinton administration on the way out, October 16, 2000. And I studied them. And I said, again, on the radio and on Hannity's TV show, the official position of the United States Department of Justice is you cannot indict a sitting president. I've said it over and over and over again since. Well, all these so-called experts were on TV and on radio, professors, former prosecutors, they just ignored it. But I wouldn't ignore it because it's seminal. It goes to the heart of everything. If you can't indict a sitting president, then what are we doing? I mean, you can investigate him. But still, that's a pretty fundamental point, isn't it? And then I kept bringing it up 2 months ago when I was on TV, Levin TV, radio, Hannity, Fox and Friends. Kept bringing it. You can't indict a sitting president. You can't indict a sitting. So now everybody's pointing out you can't indict a sitting president. This is how it works, ladies and gentlemen. It's very important. I want to go through some more of this with you because I'm doing this for a reason. We'll be right back.
Mark Levin.
Take our time. We're going to walk through this and bring us out the other end. Cannot indict a sitting president according to the Department of Justice. According to Department of Justice regulations, the special counsel must follow the policies of the Department of Justice. This is central, isn't it? I've been barking this for a year. So subpoena president to appear before a grand jury? I was the first to say no. Fight it. Alan Dershowitz was on there. He said, well, we really don't have any options. So, well, of course he does. Don't do it. The purpose of those 49 questionnaires is to indict the president. Purpose of an indictment is to try the president and remove him, all of which is unconstitutional. And I know it's unconstitutional, and not just because the Department of Justice said so in 2 memoranda. Because if you study the impeachment issue, which I've done next, you realize that the only way you can remove a president of the United States is by the Senate. The Senate. Not a prosecutor, not a jury, not a court. The Senate. Stay with me. We'll continue. I'll be right back.
Liberty's voice, Mark Levin. Talk with that voice now. 877-381-3811.
The only way the president can be removed is by the Senate. The 25th Amendment is inapplicable here for reasons I don't need to get into. It is the sole constitutional method for removing a president. That's what the framers said. They spent a lot of time looking at this, impeachment generally. And they weren't really looking at impeachment of judges. Impeachment of judges isn't even in the Constitution, but they are covered. They weren't talking about impeachment of a vice president. They were talking about, really, effectively, the impeachment of a president. And we talked a little bit about this earlier this week, didn't we? And they debated it, and they went through great pains about what it should mean, English common law. George Mason made his recommendation. James Madison disagreed. And they came up with the language that they have now for impeachment. And the trial in the Senate. In Britain, while our men were debating the Constitution in Philadelphia, they had a similar system. The charges would come out of the House of Commons, and the trial would take place in the House of Lords. So they copied that part of it from the British. The definitions they used, high crimes and misdemeanors and so forth and so on, They took the definitions in English common law, accepted some, and adjusted others. They also made the point, Hamilton did, that the president shouldn't be, his existence shouldn't be at the behest of the Senate. So they wanted a mechanism to remove a president if necessary, but not to have a president threatened day in and day out with impeachment, which is what's happening today. But it's much more pernicious today because we have a prosecutor who I think believes he has the power to remove a president. And we have a Democrat Party with that belief too. I want to reiterate to you, no president has been indicted while in office. No president has been forced to appear before, in person, a federal grand jury. No president has been tried for any crimes while in office. A prosecutor and a jury cannot substitute for the United States Senate. Cannot. And it's never happened in American history. Now, as I was thinking about this, I think it was last weekend, I posted something on Facebook, or it may have been before, and we talked about it. As a matter of fact, it was before that. And I talked about it with Joe DeGeneva and Dan Bongino on Life, Liberty, and Levin. And it was this. Congress has a responsibility to step up right now and to protect the Constitution and the executive branch from Mueller, as opposed to protecting Mueller, who is the perpetrator in this case. We talked about that on this show and on Fox. And there should be hearings, and Mr. Mueller should be forced to testify about the positions of the Department of Justice in those two memorandum, about the position of the framers of the Constitution when it comes to removal, rather than running to his defense. We talked about that. Apparently somebody's written an op-ed about that now. Good for them. The day after the election, I'm not going to bore you with clips. We could do this day in and I'm not going to do it. I told you they were going to try and impeach this president or indict him. Because they hate him, and they've always hated him. I objected strenuously to the way that retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn was treated, when virtually everybody else abandoned him around here. And I told you then something was terribly wrong about the way this man was treated, and I smelled a rat. Not because I'm prescient, but I've been around. I smelled a rat. That he was set up somehow, some way, but I didn't know exactly how. Now we know. Now we know. Paul Manafort. I objected to the way Manafort was being treated. I don't know the man. I don't know anything about him. But the abusive tactics by the FBI and Mueller digging into issues in 2005 and 2007, I don't need a federal judge to tell me what's going on. You and I talked about this months and months and months ago. Wildly out of control, the prosecutor. Wildly outside his mandate. Even when it came to the House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Devin Nunes, who was being trashed and attacked by the media, by Lindsey Graham, by the Republican chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, by John McCain, by a whole bunch of people, including our own media. I said, no. Devin Nunes is a hero. For 6 months, he had to sit on the sideline when a phony ethics complaint was filed. And the people in my business were wetting themselves. They wouldn't come to the man's defense. I came to his defense because I've seen this before. I've seen it before. And they tried it with me. Because he's on to something. Because he's a fighter. Because he's trying to get to the bottom of this. And we've talked about this over and over again about Mueller's abuse of power. His preposterous indictment of 13 Russian trolls. Right out of the box, we talked about this. How ridiculous this was. We've talked about his ties to Comey and Rosenstein. We've talked about his past cases. And we've talked about how Rosenstein should never have been involved in these matters. He's a witness. He wrote a memo proposing the firing of Comey. He shouldn't be anywhere near this matter, but he is. We've talked about that at great length. Read from his memo. When the leaks against Trump were coming fast and furiously, we said they have to be coming from the top ranks of the FBI. I even told you about the former deputy director of the FBI, felt that he was deep throat. He was the guy leaking a Watergate. And we talked about this, and I said, well, guess what? Somebody at the top of the FBI, I don't know who, is leaking, because that is the mothership. They're the ones that know who's being investigated for what. Turns out, they're all leaking. Comey, McCabe, Strzok, Page, others. Top of the FBI. Having, again, based on my experience, I insisted that Congress needed to secure a copy of the FISA applications to determine what information was used to secure a remarkable, extraordinary warrant. First, I thought against Trump world generally, but then we later learned it was against Carter Page to go through the back door to surveil Trump world. You had to get a hold of the applications to find out what the hell was going on. Well, eventually, they got a hold of enough of it to find out what was going on. The dossier, the infamous dossier, funded by the Hillary Clinton campaign and the DNC, smelled another rat. Something wasn't right about that FISA. Something wasn't right. And now we know what wasn't right. I've been insisting that it's not possible all of this could be taking place without the White House knowing about most of it, without Obama knowing about most of it. So much of it was already in the media. How would Obama not know about it? I contend to this day, he did and he does. All roads go to Obama. And I believe they do. When Comey, quote-unquote, briefed the president-elect about the dossier and only mentioned a little piece, the most embarrassing, the most humiliating, involving the Russian prostitutes, I told you then he did that so he could blackmail the President of the United States. More than set him up, but if necessary, blackmail him. Comey knew that wasn't true. Comey knew the source of that information. Even though he's on his book tour and he says, I don't know, nothing. He knew. He knew it wasn't true. So why did he present it to the president? To give him a heads up? Well, if you're going to give him a heads up, wouldn't you tell him who funded it? He wasn't curious about that. I don't believe any of it. Comey was telling the President of the United States, in my view, I have this. Look what I have on you. You know, Jay Johnson later would say that he was concerned that Comey not brief the president because it might look like it was a threat. I believe it was a threat. To this day, I believe it was a threat. Then this issue of unmasking that we've talked about at great length over the course of the last 18 months or so. We still haven't gotten to the bottom of this. The unmasking of American citizens, the leaking of Flynn's name. We had a good idea whose fingerprints were on this. Susan Rice. Turns out she was one of them. Samantha Power at the United Nations. She was another one. And there were others that played a key role in unparalleled amount of unmasking of American citizens in the lead up to this election. It's still an area that requires thorough investigation. And I argued that the Obama administration, Obama, Rice, Lynch, Comey, Brennan, Clapper, had failed to effectively address Russia's interference in our election. It was on their watch that the Russians were mucking around in our election. And they've never been held to account. Never. The victim, Trump, is under investigation. Not the men and women who allowed it to occur. They're on the sidelines shooting spitballs. They did next to nothing. Next to nothing. And they waited. Wasn't until shortly before the general election that Obama made it public. And even informed Congress. Because, as I surmised at the time, they thought Hillary would win. And they didn't want to do anything to raise any suspicions about her victory or any questions about it. So they waited. And we know they did nothing. Turns out, we learned that Susan Rice, in August of 2016, directed the White House cybersecurity team to stand down. The head of that team said, hey, look, the Russians are trying to interfere with the election. Let us put a memo together for the president. Let us give him options. Stand down, she said. And no memo, no options. Because you'll box the president in. Box him into what? Box him into what? And during last 18 months or so, especially March 2017, well, it's a sore point with me. I received almost no support at the beginning of this. Almost none. You can go back and check this stuff yourself, including from some friends. And I won't forget it. Many of whom are out there now beating their chests about how they did this and how they did that and how they discovered this. I'm not into that. I'm laying out what I've done on this show and how seriously I take this. You know, ladies and gentlemen, you know me by now. I didn't start out in radio. I started out wanting Ronald Reagan to be president when I was a young man. I didn't even know who he was. I was from Pennsylvania. He was from California, but I knew he was a conservative. I knew we needed a conservative. So in 1976, I took on the Republican establishment, a bunch of young Turks and I did in Pennsylvania, to try and get his support in Pennsylvania. They were backing Ford. 1980, the same thing. The Reagan Revolution. I was such an honor to be part of that and to work for that man for 8 years. The Tea Party Revolution. Such an honor to be part of that with liberty and tyranny and to attend the rallies. Then we duked it out in this election. I supported Cruz in the primary and I supported Trump in the general. And we're duking it out now. This is my life. This is what I do. This is what I believe in. It's not a joke with me. And what's happening to this country now, and this domestic surveillance, I've told you, it's the greatest scandal of all time. This domestic political surveillance by an administration against the opposition candidate, the opposition party, the use of the FBI, the use of the CIA, the use of other intelligence agencies, the use of FISA. By God, this is a serious matter. I'll be right back.
Mark Levin.